If you had asked anyone on base about us a year ago, they would have said we were solid, the kind of couple other couples pointed to during backyard barbecues behind identical beige duplexes. The kind of family that showed up to every change of command ceremony, every 4th of July cookout, every mandatory holiday gathering with the same matching smiles. I used to take pride in that. I used to think that meant something. We lived on Fort Liberty now, but everyone still called it Bragg out of habit. The houses were lined up in perfect military symmetry, tiny patches of grass out front, American flags clipped to porches, kids' bikes scattered on sidewalks like they'd been dropped mid-laughter. My husband Daniel was a staff sergeant in the 82nd Airborne. I worked part-time at the on-base medical clinic, mostly handling paperwork, and the rest of my life revolved around our 8-year-old son, Caleb. Daniel wore his uniform like it was part of his skin. Even out of uniform, he carried himself straight, chin slightly lifted, like someone was always evaluating him. He was the kind of man who shook hands firmly and looked people directly in the eye. Other wives would tell me how lucky I was. They'd say, "You got one of the good ones," while sipping white wine out of plastic cups. And I believed them. We met when I was 23. He had just made specialist back then. I was waitressing in Fayetteville, finishing community college, trying to figure out what I wanted out of life. He walked in with 2 other soldiers, sunburned and loud. But he wasn't the loudest. He watched more than he talked. Tipped well. Came back the next week alone. That's how it started. He deployed twice in the first 5 years of our marriage. Afghanistan the first time, Poland the second. I learned how to sleep on one side of the bed. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet with YouTube. I learned how to hold it together when Caleb asked why Daddy missed his birthday again. When Daniel came home, he'd wrap his arms around me so tight I couldn't breathe. And I'd think, this is what sacrifice looks like. This is what love costs. The last deployment changed him, but I told myself that was normal. He was quieter, more guarded. He kept his phone face down on the kitchen counter, which I noticed but tried not to read into. I blamed stress, PTSD, the army, anything but him. Life on base has this strange, suffocating closeness to it. Everyone knows everyone. Rumors travel faster than official emails. If a couple argues loudly one night, 3 houses down will know by morning. That pressure forces you to perform, to smile bigger, to pretend harder. And we were good at pretending. Our mornings ran like clockwork. Daniel up at 500, shower running before the sun came up, the smell of his body wash, some cheap, aggressive sports scent, mixing with the coffee I'd start in the kitchen. Caleb stumbling out half asleep in superhero pajamas. Breakfast at the small oak table. Daniel scrolling through something on his phone between bites of scrambled eggs. He started going to the gym twice a day, said he was trying to make E7 before he turned 35, said he needed to stand out. I supported that. I bragged about it even. He's so disciplined, I told my mom on the phone. But discipline doesn't explain late-night text notifications that light up a dark bedroom at 11:47 p.m. The first time I asked about it, he didn't get defensive. That's what made it worse. He just shrugged and said, "Group chat. The guys are idiots." Then he rolled over and kissed my shoulder like that settled it. I wanted to be the cool military wife, the secure one, not the paranoid stereotype everyone joked about. So I swallowed my questions. The letter came on a Thursday afternoon in early March. Rainy, gray. One of those Carolina days where the sky feels low and heavy. Caleb was at a friend's house. Daniel was still at work. I remember because I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard the mailbox clang shut. I wasn't expecting anything important. Just bills, probably another flyer about some on-base event. I grabbed the stack and walked back inside, flipping through envelopes absent-mindedly. Most were addressed to both of us. Utility bill, USAA statement, something from the school. Then there was one with Daniel's name typed cleanly across the front. No return address I recognized. Just a law office in Raleigh. My stomach did this strange, slow drop. I told myself not to be dramatic. Maybe it was something about a traffic ticket. Maybe someone had used his name in some paperwork. Military families deal with weird administrative stuff all the time. But my hands were already shaking when I slid it open with the edge of a butter knife. I didn't even make it to the second paragraph before my vision blurred. Notice of intent to establish paternity. I read that line 3 times before the words actually landed. My brain tried to rearrange them into something less catastrophic. Paternity of what? It had to be some kind of mistake. Wrong Daniel, wrong address. Then I saw her name. Lindsay Carter. I knew that name. She was one of the newer wives. Her husband Mike had transferred in last year. Infantry, same battalion as Daniel. I'd met her at a coffee saying the FRG organized. She had long blonde hair and this nervous laugh. She'd asked me what it was like during deployments. I told her it got easier, that you just find your rhythm. My hands went cold. The letter stated that Miss Carter had named Daniel as the biological father of her unborn child, that legal proceedings would follow if acknowledgement wasn't signed voluntarily. Unborn child. I sat down hard on the couch because my knees wouldn't hold me up. Lindsay was pregnant. I'd seen her at the commissary a week ago, one hand resting on a small bump beneath a loose sweater. She had smiled at me, asked how Caleb was doing, and I had smiled back. I checked the date on the letter. It had been sent 3 days earlier.
Daniel hadn't mentioned anything. No warning, no hint. My chest felt like it was filling with something heavy and wet. Not quite tears yet, just pressure. I started doing math in my head even though I didn't want to. When would this have happened? During field exercises? Late nights at the gym? All those times he said he had extra training? Every memory from the past year suddenly felt contaminated, like someone had spilled ink over them. I looked around our living room. The framed family photos on the wall. Daniel in uniform holding Caleb as a toddler. The Christmas card picture from December where we all wore matching flannel pajamas and pretended we weren't exhausted from life. We looked perfect. I wanted to call him immediately, scream into the phone, demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe shock. Maybe fear of hearing confirmation in his voice. Instead, I read the letter again, slowly, every word. It mentioned that Miss Carter's husband was currently deployed overseas. That timeline made bile rise in my throat. If she was due in late summer like I thought, then this baby had been conceived while her husband was gone. And my husband had been very much home. There was no denying it. I stood up and walked into our bedroom, opened Daniel's nightstand drawer. I don't even know what I was looking for. Evidence? A second phone? Some obvious sign that I had somehow missed? All I found were the usual things. Charger cords. An old watch.
A folded program from a memorial service on base. Everything looked so ordinary. That's what hurt the most. The normalcy of it. How he could eat breakfast with us, help Caleb with math homework, kiss me goodnight, all while carrying something like this. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. My first thought wasn't even anger. It was humiliation. The base, the wives, the whispers. If this went public, and how could it not, I would be the woman whose husband knocked up another soldier's wife while her husband was deployed. I imagined Lindsay walking around with that baby. I imagined people counting months, doing the same math I was doing. And then the anger came, hot, sharp, rising from my stomach to my throat. I thought about every night I had stayed loyal, every time I defended him when people made jokes about soldiers cheating, every time I told myself trust was stronger than doubt. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, making me jump. It was Daniel. Running late, don't wait up for dinner. 3 simple sentences. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to type, "Who is Lindsay's baby's father?" I wanted to send a picture of the letter. I wanted to explode his entire world the way mine had just been blown apart. Instead, I wrote back, "Okay, be safe, be safe." The irony of that almost made me laugh. I folded the letter back into its envelope and slid it into the drawer under our coffee table. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed a few more hours of pretending before everything shattered. Because once I confronted him, there would be no going back. The sun had set by the time I heard his truck pull into the driveway. Headlights swept across the living room walls like a spotlight exposing a crime scene. I stood there in the dim light, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't recognize the man about to walk through that door. And I didn't know if I wanted to. I didn't meet him at the door like I usually did. I stayed in the living room, standing behind the couch with my arms crossed, the envelope burning a hole in the drawer beneath the coffee table. I heard his boots hit the entryway tile, the familiar thud, the sound that used to make me feel safe. "Babe," he called out casually, "you still up?" "Yeah." My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too steady, too controlled. He walked in a second later, already tugging off his patrol cap, hair flattened underneath. He looked tired, but normal, completely normal. That almost made me lose it right there. He leaned in to kiss me out of habit, and I stepped back without thinking. He paused, just slightly. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I bent down, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. I held it out between us without a word. He glanced at it, confused at first. Then I watched the exact moment recognition hit him. His face didn't drain of color dramatically like in movies. It was more subtle. His jaw tightened. His shoulders squared, like he was bracing for impact. "Why was this opened?" he asked quietly. I almost laughed. "Because it came to my house," I said. "Because your name is on it. Because I check the mail." He exhaled through his nose. Not panicked, not apologetic, just calculating. "It's not what you think." That sentence. Every cheating husband in America probably says those exact 4 words. "Then tell me what it is," I said. My hands were shaking now, and I hated that he could see it. "Explain to me how another soldier's pregnant wife is naming you as the father of her baby." He ran a hand over his face, walked past me, sat down heavily on the couch like he'd had a long day and I was just another task on his list. "It was a mistake," he said. "A mistake?" My voice cracked. "You don't accidentally get someone pregnant, Daniel." He looked up at me then, eyes sharp. "Lower your voice." Caleb wasn't home, but the reflex to keep things quiet on base was ingrained in both of us. Paper-thin walls, close neighbors, always someone listening.
I'm not lowering anything, I said, though I did drop my volume automatically. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. It happened a few times. That's it. It didn't mean anything. The words hit me like physical blows. A few times? I felt like the room was tilting. While her husband was deployed, he didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I tried to picture it. Them. Where? Our house? Her house? Some hotel off Skibo Road? The thought made my skin crawl. When? I demanded. When did you have time to start another family? It's not another family, he snapped. It was just sex. Just sex. I stared at him, this man I'd built my entire adult life around, and realized I didn't know him at all. How long? I asked, my voice quieter now, deadlier. He hesitated again. Since last summer. Last summer. That was when he'd started going to the gym twice a day, when he'd said he needed to focus on career progression, when he'd come home smelling like a different brand of laundry detergent sometimes, and I told myself I was imagining it. That's almost 9 months, I whispered. It wasn't constant. I laughed, a short broken sound. Oh, well, that makes it better. He stood up suddenly, frustrated. You think I planned this? You think I wanted this mess? No, I shot back. I think you wanted to feel wanted. I think you liked sneaking around. I think you assumed you'd never get caught. His eyes flashed. Don't act like I'm some villain. You know what deployments do to people. You know how this life is. There it was, the excuse wrapped in patriotism and sacrifice. I was here too, I said, my chest heaving. I was lonely too. I was scared too. But I didn't crawl into someone else's bed. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Does Mike know? I asked. His silence told me no. So she's just carrying this secret around while her husband is overseas. She said she was going to handle it, he muttered. Handle it, like it was a scheduling conflict. I felt nauseous. And you were just going to let her? I asked. You were just going to let her husband come home and what? Raise your kid? His jaw clenched again. We didn't know it was mine for sure, but you knew it could be. Another silence. I walked to the kitchen because I needed space. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to ground myself. Images flashed through my head. Lindsay's hand on her stomach at the commissary. The way she avoided eye contact last week. The way Daniel had been glued to his phone lately. How many times? I asked again, not turning around. I don't know. Try. 5, maybe 6. Each number felt like a countdown detonating inside my chest. In our bed, I whispered. No. I turned to look at him. Where? Her place. That somehow made it worse. The fact that he'd walked into another soldier's home, sat on another man's couch, touched his wife in his own house. Was it during the day? I asked, my voice hollow, while I was at work, while Caleb was at school. He didn't answer, and I didn't need him to. I felt something inside me start to harden. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder. What are you going to do? I asked. He looked at me like that was the wrong question. What do you mean? The letter says legal proceedings, paternity test, child support. This isn't going away, Daniel.
He ran his hands through his hair, pacing now. I'll deal with it. That's not an answer. He stopped and looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something close to fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, fear of consequences, of his career being destroyed, of UCMJ, of fraternization charges, adultery, conduct unbecoming. If this gets out, he said quietly, it'll wreck everything. Everything. I thought about Caleb, his school, his friends, the stability we'd built around constant moves and deployments. You should have thought about that before you slept with her, I said flatly. He flinched like I'd slapped him. We stood there in silence for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator, distant laughter from a neighbor's backyard, normal life continuing like ours hadn't just imploded. Do you love her? I asked finally. He looked genuinely surprised. No. Does she love you? I don't think so. I swallowed hard. Then what was it? He hesitated. It was easy. Easy. That word lodged itself in my chest like shrapnel. I had spent years being strong, holding down the fort, managing schedules, raising a child mostly alone, supporting his career, being dependable, and he chose easy. I walked back into the living room and sat down slowly. I want the truth, I said. All of it. Not the watered-down version, not the damage control speech. He stared at me, calculating again. There isn't more, he insisted. But something in my gut told me that wasn't true, because the letter wasn't the only thing that felt off lately. There had been late-night arguments that made no sense, a sudden password change on his phone, a weekend training exercise that had been canceled last minute, yet he still came home exhausted and distant. And Lindsay wasn't the type to blow up her entire life over a fling unless there was more to it. "Did you ever think about leaving?" I asked quietly. His eyes flicked to mine. "Leaving you?" "Yes." He didn't answer right away. And that silence scared me more than anything he'd said so far, because in that pause, I realized this might not have just been about sex, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what came next. I watched him sit there on the couch, the glow from the TV reflecting off his uniform medals and ribbons, and I realized how little I really knew him. After all these years, the man I married, the man I thought I could rely on, who had held me through sleepless nights and deployments and scraped knees, was someone I barely recognized. The thought twisted in my stomach, a knot tightening with every heartbeat. My hands were clenched in my lap, knuckles white. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he finally admitted the truth. But instead, I just sat there, letting the weight of everything crush me. Finally, he spoke. I did think about it, about leaving, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't because I didn't love you. I do. I love you. It's just this life, the stress. I didn't know how to handle it. And she was there. And she made me feel, I don't know, alive. Alive. That was the word he used. It made my stomach turn. All the nights I'd stayed up waiting for him to come home from patrols, worrying whether he was safe, whether he was thinking of me. And while I was surviving on fear and coffee, he was feeling alive in someone else's arms. I could feel the betrayal in every syllable, in every pause. And worse, I knew he wasn't lying about the feeling, because his face, normally so composed and commanding, was raw, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since before we were married. I wanted to hate him. I really did. But underneath that anger was a gnawing confusion. I couldn't understand how the man who had promised me forever could just drift away, just because someone else existed in a moment he hadn't prepared for. My mind started running through every instance, every unexplained night, every extra trip to the gym, every time he had been unreachable by phone. I wondered how many lies I'd unconsciously swallowed, how many secrets had been hidden behind his quiet demeanor and measured smiles. And all of it, the careful orchestration of our perfect family life, felt like a lie. "You know," I said finally, voice shaking, "you made it easy to believe in us. Easy to believe that what we had was real." My eyes flicked to the photos on the wall. Daniel holding Caleb, the way he smiled in uniform, the way he'd looked at me during our wedding vows, like he was making a promise to the world. "And all along, you were living a different story." He didn't respond immediately. He just rubbed his face with his hands, letting out a long, defeated sigh. I could hear it in his voice, a mix of regret, frustration, and something that scared me almost as much as the betrayal, indifference to the consequences. "I didn't plan for it to go this far," he said finally. "I thought I could stop before it got messy, before it hurt anyone. I didn't think. I wasn't thinking." The words were hollow. They barely scratched the surface. They didn't capture the nights I had cried myself to sleep, worrying that something would happen to him on a deployment, worrying that he might never come home. They didn't capture the mornings I had gotten up at 5 a.m., already exhausted from tending to Caleb, just to make sure breakfast was on the table before his truck rumbled into the driveway. They didn't capture the way I had built my life around him, only to watch him casually dismantle it in secret. I couldn't stay in the same room as him. I needed air, needed space to think. So I grabbed my keys and told him I was going for a drive. He didn't stop me, but his silence followed me out the door like a shadow I couldn't shake. The rain had let up, leaving the streets slick and reflective. I drove through the neighborhoods of the base, past identical beige duplexes, past children playing in puddles, past families laughing in their yards. Everything looked the same. Everything felt normal. And yet, my life had just exploded inside the walls of the house I shared with him. I ended up at the small diner just off the main gate, the one where service members and their families always congregated because it felt like home. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My mind refused to stop racing. Lindsay, Caleb, the baby she was carrying, Daniel. Every memory I had of him now seemed contaminated, each moment tainted with doubt. How many times had he been lying to me about his whereabouts?
How many times had I smiled at him, trusted him, and unknowingly shared my life with someone who was not entirely mine? And then came the realization I'd been avoiding: the paternity test, the legal ramifications, the child support, the scandal. On base, rumors spread like wildfire. One careless word from the wrong person, and the whispers would start. The judgment would start. My reputation, the one I had so carefully maintained as the good military wife, was at risk. My son's life, our stability, everything I had fought to keep intact, it was all suddenly fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. I called my best friend, Jessica, who lived off-post but still within town. Her husband was also in the Army, and we'd confided in each other over the years. I couldn't even get the words out at first. I just sat there in the diner booth, staring at my phone like it might magically give me a solution.
Finally, I croaked, "It's Daniel. He's involved with someone else. She's pregnant." There was a long pause, and then she said softly, almost hesitantly, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. The shame, the anger, the heartbreak, the utter disbelief, it all came rushing in at once. And as I sat there, I realized that this wasn't just about a letter, or a fling, or even the betrayal itself. This was about the life I thought I knew, the foundation I had built for myself and my family, suddenly crumbling beneath me. The life I had thought was untouchable, the life I had trusted implicitly, was gone, and there was no one to catch me as I fell. That night, I drove home in silence. The streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard, and I kept glancing at the empty passenger seat, imagining him sitting there, confessing, apologizing, begging. But he wasn't there. He had stayed home, waiting, probably thinking he could act normal and that I wouldn't confront him yet. That was always the strategy of cheaters. Hope the truth stays hidden long enough that the other person adapts, or ignores, or forgets. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't ignore. I couldn't adapt. I was too shattered. When I walked back into the house, Daniel was still in the living room, like nothing had changed. He looked up at me and offered a small, tentative smile. I wanted to throw the letter at him, rip him apart, scream and cry until my lungs gave out. But instead, I just walked past him to Caleb's room, checking on our son, feeling the pure, innocent weight of him against my chest, the one part of my life untouched by deceit. I didn't know what to do next. Confront him further? Call a lawyer? Spread the truth to the base? Or just stay quiet, pretend, and let him keep his secret while my world quietly dissolved around me? Each choice felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I realized that living like this, with the knowledge of his betrayal burning inside me, would be like trying to walk through fire every single day. And yet, I had to decide, because this wasn't something that could be ignored. It wasn't something that could be put on pause. It was real, and it was now, and it was mine to deal with. I went to bed that night without saying a word to him. Caleb was asleep in his bed, oblivious to the chaos threatening to engulf us. Daniel was in the other room, pretending to read, pretending to sleep, pretending everything was normal. And I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the envelope still burning a hole in my mind. The betrayal, the lies, the baby, Lindsay, the fear, the shame, all of it swirling together like a storm I couldn't escape. I knew the next day wouldn't be easier. There would be questions, confrontations, more letters, phone calls. The web was far from untangled. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I was standing at the edge of a chasm, and the person I trusted to hold my hand was the very one who had pushed me to it. I didn't cry that night. I didn't yell. I just lay there, listening to the faint hum of the bass, the distant bark of dogs, the occasional rumble of a military truck, and wondered how a life that had once felt so secure could unravel so completely, so quietly, right under my nose. I wondered how people survive this. Cheating, betrayal, lies hidden for months, maybe years, and still manage to show up for breakfast, still manage to play family, still manage to pretend everything is normal while the world inside them burns. I didn't know yet if I could survive it, but I knew I had to. The next morning, I woke up before Daniel and Caleb. The house smelled like coffee and breakfast, eggs frying in the pan, the faint scent of bacon, the aroma of Daniel's ridiculous strong soldier coffee blend. I could hear him humming softly in the kitchen, that deep, comfortable sound that had once made me feel safe.
I hated him for it. Hated that he could keep up appearances, act like everything was fine when I knew exactly what had happened. I felt like I was living in a surreal movie, and I was the only one who knew it wasn't fiction. Caleb bounded into the kitchen wearing his superhero pajamas, rubbing his eyes, yawning, and laughing as Daniel lifted him up to sit on the counter. I watched from the doorway, my chest tight, stomach twisting. That image, the very picture of our perfect military family, was tainted now, contaminated by betrayal. Every smile, every hug, every laugh I had cherished suddenly carried a shadow. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Daniel glanced at me briefly, but didn't notice the cold edge in my eyes. He was too busy making pancakes, flipping them expertly, keeping Caleb entertained. That day, the cruelest part of it all became clear. He hadn't changed. He could still be charming, still be the dad, still be the husband on the surface. But beneath it all, the man I trusted had been unfaithful, and that reality couldn't be undone with syrup or morning smiles. I sat down at the table, staring at the plate Daniel set in front of me. I didn't eat. I couldn't. I could feel my hands trembling slightly as I picked at the edge of a napkin. The envelope from the day before still sat in the drawer under the coffee table, the words inside replaying in my head over and over. Lindsay, baby, paternity, legal action, everything that had come crashing into my life in the span of one afternoon. I realized that my family, my home, my life, everything I thought was solid, was now precariously balanced, teetering on a truth that could explode at any moment. Later that morning, after Caleb had gone outside to ride his bike, I sat down at the small dining table and finally confronted Daniel properly. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head all night, pacing through the kitchen, whispering words to myself in the mirror, trying to decide which emotion to lead with first: anger, hurt, disbelief. By the time I finally spoke, my voice was low, controlled, but with an edge sharp enough to slice. Daniel, I started, my eyes locked on his. We need to talk. No more pretending, no more half-truths. I want everything, the full story. He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. Okay, he said, voice tight. I'll tell you everything. And then he did. He told me about the late nights at the gym that weren't really at the gym, about the lunches that were excuses to be somewhere else, about the way Lindsay had initiated contact, about the first time it happened and every time after. He tried to minimize it at first, explaining it as a mistake, something out of control, something unplanned. But as I pressed him, as I asked questions that cut straight to the core of his actions, the truth spilled out. Every detail, every stolen moment, every lie he had constructed to maintain appearances. I don't remember how long we sat there, him talking, me listening, occasionally gasping, sometimes crying, sometimes shaking with anger. At some point, I realized that I wasn't angry at him in the abstract anymore. I was angry at the life I thought we had, at the trust I had given him, at the sacrifices I had made that had gone unacknowledged. I was angry at myself for trusting too much, for believing that loyalty could withstand temptation. After he finished, the silence in the room was deafening.
I could hear Caleb laughing outside, the sound cutting through the tension like glass. I wanted to scream, to shatter the window, to destroy everything in sight. But instead, I sat there, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the man I had loved. They didn't match. They never had. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said finally. My voice was barely a whisper. You've destroyed everything I believed in. I know, he said quietly, staring at the table, at his hands. I know I've broken you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know how to fix this. And that was it. That was the raw, naked truth. He didn't know how to fix it. And I didn't know if I wanted to stay. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like the life I had built was someone else's memory I was reliving. Over the next few weeks, life became a careful dance of pretending and planning. I didn't tell anyone on base, not yet, because once it got out, there was no going back. Rumors would spread, judgment would rain down, and Caleb's world would be upended. I watched Daniel closely, noting every lie, every omission, every glimmer of guilt or lack thereof. I recorded my own feelings in a notebook, trying to understand what had happened, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become our life. Then the letters started. Lindsay had sent more, formal, legal ones now, demanding acknowledgement, threatening to file a paternity suit. Each envelope was a punch to the gut. Each signature from her lawyer was a reminder that the secret couldn't stay hidden forever. I tried to convince myself that Daniel would fix it, that he would step up, that he would take responsibility. But deep down, I knew that responsibility wasn't something he truly understood. For him, it had always been about survival, convenience, and avoiding consequences. I couldn't live in that world. Not completely. Not with the knowledge of what he had done, what he had betrayed. I started looking at apartments off base, places far enough away that no one would know, that Caleb could have some semblance of normalcy. I called attorneys quietly, pretending to ask questions for a friend, but documenting everything for the day when I would need proof. Documentation. Evidence of his betrayal. Caleb never suspected. He still hugged his dad, laughed at his jokes, and ran to him when he came home from work. Watching him, my heart ached. My son didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to grow up in a house where trust had been violated, where his father had broken promises, and where his mother was quietly unraveling. And Daniel? He went about his days as if nothing had changed, though sometimes I caught him staring at me, eyes heavy with guilt, or maybe just with fear. I could never tell. I knew the letters from Lindsay were sitting in his drawer, waiting to explode into our lives. I knew he was afraid, but afraid doesn't mean remorseful. And I realized something terrifying. Even if I stayed, things would never be the same. That perfect military family we had portrayed, the life everyone envied, it was gone. The final confrontation came one rainy afternoon. The sky was slate gray, the base quiet, almost eerily so, as if the world itself had paused to watch us fall apart. I had made my decision, but I needed him to hear it from me, to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. I handed him a folder of letters, documented emails, phone messages, everything I had gathered over the past month. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice low, firm, and resolute. "I'm taking Caleb. You will have a relationship with him, if you want, but this cannot continue. I can't stay here pretending. I can't stay in this house pretending. I can't stay with you pretending. You made your choices, Daniel. Now I'm making mine." He stared at the folder like it was a bomb he hadn't expected. Then he looked at me, eyes wide, and I saw something in his expression I had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control. Fear of the life he had taken for granted crumbling before him. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. "I will get an attorney," I continued, voice steady. "Everything will be handled legally. You will not manipulate this. You will not hide it. You made your bed. Now you'll sleep in it." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving him standing in the living room with the sunlight cutting across the floorboards, highlighting the life he had destroyed. Caleb was waiting in the car, still half asleep, clutching his blanket. I held him tight, feeling the weight of what we had lost and the faint, stubborn hope of what we might still salvage. Driving away from the base for the first time without him, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. Pain, heartbreak, betrayal, it all surged inside me like a tidal wave, but underneath it, there was resolve. I wouldn't be defined by his mistakes. I wouldn't let the base gossip dictate our lives. I would protect my son, and I would rebuild, even if it was from the wreckage he had left behind. And as the rain pelted the windshield, blurring the familiar streets of Fort Bragg into streaks of gray, I realized that the life I once believed was perfect had been a facade. But for the first time, I knew that my own truth, messy, painful, raw, was mine to reclaim. We were no longer the perfect military family on base, but as I drove toward an uncertain future, I knew that what came next would be real, and that was something I hadn't had in a long time. We were broken, yes. Betrayed, yes. But we were also alive, and for Caleb and me, that was enough to start over. The silence in the car was thick, but it was a clean kind of silence, a silence that didn't carry lies, didn't carry secrets, didn't carry betrayal. Only the quiet hum of the engine, the rain against the windshield, and the faint but steady beat of hope. We drove toward freedom, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally in control of our story. No one on base would understand. No one could, but I didn't need them to. This was ours, my son and me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we could survive.